Hi, I'm Nicole Shen from Houston, Texas. Welcome to SDSF Live. Please let us know where you're logging on from. SDSF Live is brought to you from the Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome Foundation, providing support to families around the world. We are currently live from Facebook and YouTube. You may comment from both platforms and we'll see it on our feed. The show is public, so please do not ask or share personal information that you are not comfortable sharing all over the internet. These shows serve as a library of topics on YouTube for families to access later, where it could also be translated into many other languages. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Nicole. Glad to be back. I was very happy. Everyone got to have fun with Savannah last time, and that was a great
Yeah.
time. There's a little bit of an emergency. We're not currently live on YouTube. We're having a little bit of technical
Oh,
difficulties,
okay.
which is why we started a little bit late, but it still will be available afterwards, uploaded to YouTube, and there it will be able to be translated. I'm Michelle. I'm from Michigan, and I'm happy to be with everyone tonight. I'm super happy for this show. This is one we've been trying to get on for everybody since we started, I think. It was one of
Yeah, it was
the
one of
most
our
requested shows.
in a lot of different arenas, both from patients and from families, right? And from a lot of different angles. So we wanted to
Yes.
make sure we did it right.
So Sarah Bowman is a partner in the estate planning and trust and estates group in the Seattle office of K&L Gates LLP. Sarah focuses her practice on complex estate planning, family office structuring and management, probate estate and trust administration, charitable planning, and resolving estate and trust disputes. Sarah is also the co-founder and president of the Butterfly Guild out of Seattle Children's Hospital, which is one of my favorite organizations. It's a nonprofit that aims to fund research of pediatric bone marrow failure diseases like Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome. She also serves on the Seattle Children's Philanthropic Advisory Council. Sarah has a 13-year-old daughter with Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome, along with a second complex bone inflammation disorder called chronic recurrent multifocal osteomyelitis. Sarah has lots of firsthand experience managing multiple doctors across multiple clinics and states, like many of us, as well as attending to a full work schedule and a child at home with complex medical needs. I think this is going to be a really great show.
Again, Michelle. Hi, Sarah. Again, Michelle said this idea has been heavily requested. It was on our list from original shows we wanted to have. It sort of came from a camp session we had where the topic came up, and then we kind of wanted to build out the show from there. It is going to be emotionally charged, complex. So Sarah is the best person to have on for this. So we're so thankful that she came on with us. We're going to be covering a lot of different topics. And again, we understand this is going to be a sensitive topic. Beyond thankful for Sarah. So thank you so much, Sarah, for being here with us.
Thank you, Nicole and Michelle, and hello to all of you at home or wherever you may be. And thanks for the great introduction. So as Nicole and Michelle mentioned, I have in my professional capacity been doing estate planning for about 16 years, day in and day out. And so part of my job, really my whole job, is talking to people and helping them with really personal issues, such as how do you plan for your assets when you pass away, and then helping the family members when somebody close to them does pass away, and jumping through all of the administrative hoops of how do you deal with it, what do you do. So today I'm going to walk through the fundamentals of estate planning in general. This presentation is not intended to be legal advice specifically, and we are an international community here, and laws differ by state in the United States and then differ in different countries. So I'm going to talk pretty generally about planning in the United States, but everything is different from state to state. So you would want to get local counsel on anything really specific to your situation. So I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint, you guys, and share that with you to talk about the fundamentals of estate planning. And when we get to the fundamentals, we're talking about certain documents that you want to have in order. So what I consider to be the fundamental estate planning documents would include for each person a last will and testament, a revocable trust, and I put here a big maybe because it doesn't actually apply to every single human out there, a durable power of attorney for asset management, or sometimes called a durable power of attorney for finances, a durable power of attorney for healthcare, a healthcare directive, otherwise known as a living will, and then a cremation or burial directive. So every adult in the United States being 18 years or older can and should have all of these documents. And they really do apply to everyone because everybody, unfortunately, is going to pass away and everybody has stuff. So if you have a bank account, if you have a car, if you have a house, if you have a retirement account or life insurance or anything, you really should have these documents. And we're going to talk a little bit as we move along about how the powers of attorney are really important as well. So what is a will? A will at its root is a document that says who gets what and who's in charge when you pass away. And that covers you would generally designate a person or persons to be the actual humans who will take charge of all of your stuff, be it your financial stuff, your physical stuff, and handle it and make sure that it goes to the people that you care about. And if you have minor children, this document, your will, could also designate who you want to be the guardians for those minor children. And when you're considering the guardians, you really want to think about if you have a married couple, Bob and Susie, to be the guardians. What happens if Bob and Susie should divorce? What happens if Bob or Susie dies? Do you have a preference for Bob or Susie or whoever it may be? And you can really spell out those considerations in your will. You can say that you want this married couple to be, or this cohabitating couple to be your guardians for your minor children. But if they should break up, then you want this other couple. You can also specify whether you wish for your children to move to those people's home if they live in a different state or a different country, or you can put in your will a preference that, let's say, your estate holds your house and your children be able to remain in their home and go to their school, and you have that person come move in with your kids. The guardianship proceedings in each state in the United States will vary. In Washington State, which is where I'm located, there is a procedure, an actual guardianship procedure when a parent passes away, when both parents pass away, to say for the court to actually legally designate these humans that you've named as guardian in your last will and testament. And the court's job at that point in time is to make sure that these humans that you've named are still appropriate and good. And in Washington State, the court will even interview the children if they're old enough and if it's appropriate to say, hey, do you want to go live with your Aunt Susie or not? Or is there something else going on? And I would say that for the guardianship provisions, which are really, really important and really, really hard, try not to let perfection be your enemy. So I always encourage clients to consider, if you died tomorrow, what would you want to happen? Is it going to be your parents? Is it going to be your sibling? Is it going to be your best friend who's going to take your kids? What would you want to happen tomorrow? And if you change your mind later on, you can change your documents. A will is revocable so long as you are alive, revocable and editable so long as you are alive and so long as you are competent to make changes. So I encourage you to do the best you can with these decisions, understanding that it might not be absolutely totally perfect, but do your best to have something in place. Same thing for pets. Pets are really important members of your family, and you might want to say, for instance, that your pets go with your kids. You might want to say that your pets go to this person with some amount of money to help care for them. It's totally up to you, but I encourage you to think about it. And for pets in particular, I encourage you to tell the people who they are that you've named so that they know they're the ones responsible to come over to your house and scoop them up. And same for your kids too, just so there's nothing left in the lurches. How big is your estate is also something to consider when doing a will. Whether your estate is big or small dollar-wise, it is really important to have these documents in place. Depending on the size of your monetary estate, whether you own a bunch of real estate or own businesses or have a bunch of money, or if you don't, will impact what kind of tax planning will go into that plan. So that's something you should talk about with your local counsel when you do these documents. Some of you may have heard about a revocable living trust, and a revocable living trust is often considered a will alternative, but you would still have a last will and testament that would we often call it a pour over will. Well, it would say, when I die, I have all of my assets pour into my revocable living trust. But the revocable living trust would be a separate document that says who gets what and who's in charge when you die. If you own real estate, real property in multiple states in the United States, you may want to consider a revocable living trust. Or you may have, if you don't, you could have multiple state laws controlling when you die, and that can just make it more expensive and more complicated for your surviving family members and friends who are administering your estate. If you live in a state that has certain demanding probate and related fees, if you own assets in your own name as opposed to a living trust, then you would really want to consider a living trust. California is one of those states where almost everybody who owns any real estate will have or any assets of substance will have a revocable living trust, and then actually retitle those assets into the name of the living trust. So for me, it would be, instead of I own my house as Sarah Bowman, it would be I own my house as Sarah Bowman as trustee of my revocable living trust. You would still have complete control and ownership of those assets. They're still yours. It's really a packaging of your assets for how you hold them. Think about if you were to go on vacation and you take your clothes and you put them into a suitcase. They're still your clothes, it's still your stuff, but you've packaged them in your suitcase to take them with you. A revocable trust acts in a similar capacity to package your stuff and take it with you and control who gets what and who's in charge. We're also going to talk about powers of attorney. Powers of attorney are really, really important. And I put really important here in big bold words here on this page because I want to drive this home. Regardless of your net worth, regardless of your assets, you should have a power of attorney for asset management, which is finances, and power of attorney for healthcare. In some states and in some places, they will combine those powers of attorney into one document. In any case, you should have it. So this document would say in writing, who do you want to manage your financial matters if you can't? So this is really important for everyone, but particularly for folks who have known medical issues where they know that there might be a consideration or a time where they need or want help with somebody to pay their bills or access their finances or be able to transfer assets for them. And in most states, it's going to be a really cumbersome and expensive process to get somebody to have legal authority to act on your behalf for financial matters unless you have this power of attorney in place. So you want to think about who that person or persons would be. For a married couple, you often name your spouse, and then you might have a backup of a sibling or a child or a friend. There's also professionals who act in this role. And for kids who become young adults, I really encourage kids who become 18 and who are no longer minor children to affect these powers of attorney as soon as possible. So for kids who turn 18 and they go off to college, a parent is no longer going to have access to bank accounts or access to call a bank and do something on behalf of a child. The bank or any financial institution is going to require this power of attorney to be on file in order for a parent to help a child. We've also got this power of attorney for healthcare. So this is where, again, same thing except for healthcare decisions. So the power of attorney for healthcare comes into play when you cannot make healthcare decisions for yourself. So long as you are competent and able to generally communicate in any way, whether that's blinking your eyes yes for yes or keeping them closed for no, or writing on a piece of paper or any other type of communication, generally you would get to control your own healthcare. But if you can't make decisions for yourself, either because you're in a coma or you are on too many medications to make decisions, or you simply want to have help, then you have to have this document in place. If you get into a situation where you are, let's say you become incapacitated for any sort of healthcare reason, and you cannot make decisions, but you're going to be incapacitated for a really long time, then a healthcare facility may require a guardianship conservatorship to be put into place, which is usually a very expensive, long legal proceeding, long as in at least a couple of months to get somebody appointed. And that time can be really, really imperative, especially if you have an emergent medical situation. Generally speaking, a power of attorney for healthcare and a power of attorney for financial matters is not terribly complicated to do and not terribly expensive to do. So I really encourage everybody to get these documents in place. I have on here for healthcare a note that to consider a separate document for authority to care for minor children for a temporary period. So if you're a parent, and particularly a parent of a kiddo with complex medical needs, which I know there's many of you out there part of this discussion today, then you can, in most states, again, what you put on this paper and how it has to be executed will be based on your local state law. But you can do a document that gives somebody else legal authority to handle medical decisions while you're gone. So if you are going to you as parent are going to go on vacation and be out of state, let's say, or out of country for a period of time and you're living in the United States, then you can have a document that gives legal authority to person X to handle medical decisions for your child if they end up in the hospital or in the ER and you physically cannot be there, or if you're going to be on an airplane and you're not going to be available to talk to the doctors and some human needs to be on point to make decisions right away. So this document would be really, really important, and generally I'd recommend that you include with it directions for your child. You could have directions for, this is the local hospital to go, these are the main doctors, these are the doctor contacts, these are the tests that generally get run if there's a fever, particularly for Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome, or whatever the instructions are that generally need to be put into place. You can have it nice and packaged there so that if there's an emergency, that person who's caring for your child is all set to go. Another document that's really important but optional to have in place is a living will, which is otherwise known as a healthcare directive in most places. And these are governed by state law. So in Washington, a healthcare directive is a directive, just what it sounds like. It's your statement of wishes and intent of what you want to happen if you are in a serious terminal, permanent unconscious position. So if you're in a coma and you are not going to come out of it, according to the doctors, do you want to be kept alive with artificial nutrition and hydration? And each state has its own law with the specifics for these documents. But in general, it is your ability to state in writing your wishes of what you want to happen to you and how you want your care managed. And I would encourage you to talk to your family about these wishes, particularly if you do have a medical condition, if you yourself have Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome or any other medical condition, or even if you don't, and if it's an unforeseen thing that pops up, it's really, really helpful for family members to know what you want. And it's so much easier to talk about it before that impending medical situation comes up. I do want to point out that this is not a post form. Sometimes people ask about this. So there's a different acronym in different states. In Washington, it's called a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. And it's often a document that you'd get from your doctor. If you have a terminal condition is determined by your doctor, which in most places or a lot of places is 6 months or less to live, then and if you're competent to make decisions and you're able to work with your doctor, in many cases, your doctor can help you go through this order to say whether you do or do not want antibiotics, or you do or do not want to be resuscitated in a certain situation, or a list of other very specific treatments that you do or do not want to have. And if you sign that order and your doctor signs that order, that is an order that your durable power of attorney under your durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions cannot overrule. But not everybody has the opportunity to have a post form because not everybody is diagnosed with this terminal condition with 6 months to live. You could have an accident situation. You could die more quickly. You could not be competent to execute that document with your doctor, which is why the general healthcare directive is really important to have in place so that your family members or other designated designees generally know what your wishes may be. Another consideration that's hard to talk about sometimes is, what do you want to happen with your remains after you pass away? So generally speaking, it's going to be a cremation or burial directive that you can put into writing. Some states have other options. In Washington, within the last year or so, composting was legalized as an alternative option for folks. So some people think that sounds really great. Other people think that sounds really not great. So it's totally a personal decision as to what you want to do. And you'd want to consider what your default state law is. Some states, many states, have a default of, if you do not put in writing whether you want a cremation or burial directive, then the state will pick something for you. There's also considerations of your religious affiliation and whether your religion would require one action or the other, and whether your spouse or your other family members are going to be somewhat in conflict with that decision. So if you foresee any sort of conflict in that regard, it's really helpful and important to have in writing what you want to do. And even, I'd say even more helpful if you pre-purchase your plan with a funeral home, because that way you've paid for it, you've made the decisions, and it's really a gift to your surviving family members if they know who to call and everything's taken care of, and they don't have to make those decisions for you when that really, really difficult situation pops up. If you are in a situation where taxes are going to be an issue, then I encourage you to talk with your local estate planning attorney about estate taxes and what you can do to help. Generally, most people want to lower their tax bill. So to talk about whether you need estate tax planning. There is a federal estate tax law, which are death taxes. So currently in the United States, each individual person who has more than $12,060,000 worth of assets in 2022 would be subject to a 40% estate tax hit above that number. And some states have their own estate tax. So in Washington state, it's just over $2 million net worth, and you'd be hit with an estate tax. Other states have different numbers, and some states have no state estate tax at all. You generally have to have the planning in writing in your will or living trust before you pass away. And if you fall into this potentially estate taxable bucket, then it's really important to think about those tax planning opportunities ahead of time so that your family is not subjected to more tax than otherwise would be the case when you pass away. So some other issues to consider when doing your estate planning would be general wishes that you might have. So we've talked a little bit so far about what I consider to be some of the most fundamental documents you're going to have in place, being your will, maybe a revocable trust, your powers of attorney, living will, and a cremation or burial directive. But you might also want to have an irrevocable trust that you create during your life or that you create at your death. And to create an irrevocable trust at death, you would have words in your will or revocable trust that would spring that trust into life. And what is a trust? A trust is, talked earlier about the suitcase for your clothes. A trust is an organizational tool with rules on it for management of your assets. So you might want to have a trust for your child, let's say, to hold assets for a period of time, either until your child becomes an adult or until your child reaches a certain age, with a third party person managing those assets for the benefit of your child. There are other reasons to do trusts, and some of it is tax driven, some of it is personal life driven. You should consider trusts if you have a child with special needs meaning if your child has beyond Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome, has special considerations and may not be able to care for him or herself at any age, even upon adulthood. And if you are always going to need somebody else to be designated to help your child, either with personal matters or financial matters, then it's really important to talk with a lawyer now about getting those mechanisms in place to help. There's also tax considerations if you have a special needs child, or if you yourself are on Medicaid, and or you think your child might be on Medicaid someday, then there are special planning considerations in each state that are very different that you'd want to consider. Life insurance is also something to think about it. You might want to think about who gets those funds and what they're going to be used for. You might also have insurance for your children. Sometimes people will have life insurance for their children, especially if there is a complicated medical situation, and that money can often be used to help cover the expenses of a funeral, should you have the scenario where you have to cross that bridge with any of your children. Another thing to consider is how your assets are titled. So you may have a bank account. So you might consider, is that bank account in just your name, or are you and your spouse both on the bank account? Is your child on the bank account with you, or are you on a child's bank account with them, but you consider it your child's bank account? If you have multiple people on bank accounts or on real estate or on a car or any other type of asset, then that is often considered joint ownership. And the who gets what when you die stated in your will, that one account or one house might really belong to two or more different people. So you want to think about how that joint ownership is going to impact the control and the passing of those assets. You also, for the titling of assets, would want to think about whether you have any rights of survivorship. So if you have a bank account that is titled with transfer on death or payable on death or with right of survivorship to another person, then that titling will trump the provisions of your will. I'll say that again. The titling of your assets can trump the provisions in your will or your living trust. So if your will says, when I die, everything goes to my child, and your bank account says it is joint with right of survivorship with your spouse, then those assets will go to different places. So if you are cognizant of that, that's fine. But sometimes people forget that and think once they've done a will, it covers everything. But it doesn't. It doesn't necessarily cover absolutely everything. So you want to be careful about that. I encourage everybody to keep an updated list of all of your assets and all of your debts. So if you pass away and nobody knows what you have or what bank accounts you use or what debts you may have, it is going to be a great fishing expedition for your surviving family members. And I have helped people with this great fishing expedition, and it is super, super stressful for your survivors. So again, one of the best gifts you can have is even if you keep a nice Excel spreadsheet or a handwritten, piece of paper, or keep something in your computer files of what are your bank accounts, where do you bank. Don't keep full account numbers for security reasons, but account XYZ, right? Or where is your real estate? Where is your life insurance? Where are these assets that you own? And something I want to stress here, I put in bold, is if you don't make a plan, your home state or your home, wherever you live, if you live in a different country, will do it for you. So there is, each one of you listening to this right now, you actually do have an estate plan in place, even if you don't have a will or a trust or any powers of attorney, because our default laws will say who gets what and who's in charge, and you just might not like it. So it's much better to be cognizant of what do you want to happen and make sure that you can make sure that that comes true. So how do you start? Start the conversation. I encourage you to talk with a local estate planning attorney. And if you do this and you have children, if you have adult children, generally, tell them you have an estate plan. regardless of your net worth, let them know you have lawyer XYZ at whichever firm, and tell them that you've done a will, that you've done a trust, and you have thought about your process. And that will give your adult children time to ask questions. For older minor children, you might even want to tell them that you can put them at ease about there being a plan in place. I encourage you to also tell you and your spouse, if you're married, should talk about who your advisors are. If you are an adult child, young adult child, then talk to your parents about who your advisors are. Talk to your parents about needing advisors, getting a lawyer, getting an accountant, getting a financial planner to help you, and then keep track of who these advisors are. And if you get your documents in place, then where are you keeping them? Sometimes at my law firm, we keep original documents. We have a big vault where we keep documents for folks, but a lot of smaller firms do not, and they give the original documents back to the client. So if you are holding them somewhere, tell somebody where you have them. If you have them, I'm not a fan of putting documents in a safe deposit box, because oftentimes the people who need the documents are not on the safe deposit box, and then we have a chicken and egg scenario of how we get them out of the safe deposit box. Similarly, if you have your documents in a safe at home with a lock code, if you are going to put them in a safe, then I encourage you to feel comfortable giving the safe code to the person who you'd want to be able to access and find those documents. And if you don't feel comfortable giving that code to that person or persons, then put your documents somewhere else and let somebody know where they are. You can also have your attorney or other advisors help you with a family meeting to talk about all of these issues. I will often meet with my clients and their kids, or we can have 3 generations, sometimes grandparents, parents, and kids, and talk about adult children, and talk about what is the plan? How do they coordinate to each other? Do we include spouses in those conversations, kids, spouses, and whatnot? And how do you make sure that as a family unit, you've got everything covered, which can be really, really helpful, especially given that these conversations are often really hard to have. And I put in here, an extra comment. I've talked about this a bit, but adult children should have an estate plan too. So if you're watching, or if you have kids who are young adults and you think, well, I might not have much money, I don't really need a will, but you do. You really remember those powers of attorney are really important to make sure that the right people are designated to make medical decisions for you if you need somebody to help you. It's also really important to have somebody who can access your accounts and your stuff. And even if you don't have complex medical situations, I have absolutely had scenarios where my clients' adult children, 18, 19-year-olds, go off to college and go on spring break somewhere and get hurt in an accident and end up in a hospital. And then the parents cannot communicate with the doctors because the doctors will not communicate with them. And it is a super stressful situation. So I encourage you and your adult kids to get a plan in place. So that is the end of my presentation, and I will turn it back to Nicole and Michelle for any questions.
That was awesome. That was great. Thank you so much. Our first question is, for those of us who will probably predecease our parents, how do we ensure that our children can inherit our share from our parents' estates? Great question.
So this is a really, really good question, and something actually I work with a lot. So that comes to that family meeting and family discussions. And it's really helpful to talk, if you are the adult parent and you may predecease your parents, talk to your parents. That is the number one starting point, is talk to your parents and say, hey, mom or dad, or mom and dad, what is the plan if I should die first? I want those assets to go to my child, your grandchildren, and see what the parents say. That is often the default situation. I would say the most common scenario when I'm doing planning for folks is if we do plan for that. That is a conversation I have with every one of my clients who has children is, well, what happens if you die first? Where are the assets going to go? Are they going to go to your grandchildren? And usually the answer is yes. And so you want to ensure that your parents, grandparents, have a plan in place. And if they don't, if you die as a parent and then grandparents die, and if nobody has a will, if nobody has an estate plan, then under a lot of state laws, the default would be it just kind of flows down to the next generation. But that's the import of figuring out under your local state law, what is the default that would happen. And don't rely on the default. Go get a plan in place in writing.
That's great. This may be a really stupid question, and I'm sorry, but it's a stupid question. Okay. So we went over a lot, like that could be state specific. What happens if you move? That's my part A. Do you have to start this whole process over again in your new state? And then the second part is this only, what I'm thinking is like SDS patients get transplanted a lot in another state, right? Say Cincinnati, then their home state. Is this applicable in that other state? Like you had said, like they go off to spring break somewhere. So that sounds like it's applicable no matter where they are.
So that's a really good question. So each state law recognizes and respects the documents of a different state. So Nicole, if you had a will in Texas and then you came to Washington and you got hurt or you died here, your Texas will would work. Similarly, if you move, your documents will work, but I'm going to say that in air quotes because the longer answer is yes, you should. If you move permanently, you should reconsider and redo your documents. They'll work, and who gets what and who's in charge will generally happen. But states have some really specific tax differences, really big tax differences.
Yeah.
And also the guardianship and conservatorship provisions can differ quite a bit. So you would want to update them.
That sounds understandable. Thank you.
Something I was thinking about while this was happening is kind of to piggyback on Nicole's. Sometimes we often find that it's not as often as, say, like we live in Michigan and we travel to Cincinnati for care. But some people are coming in from out of the country to receive care here from doctors that they maybe can't access at home. Does it travel across oceans? Is it specific to the states or the country you live in?
So that's a much more complicated question. They probably don't have all the answers to.
I figured it would be.
But in general, for the who gets what and who's in charge when you die is governed by your country laws. So there are treaties between some countries that have agreements for those types of things. But in general, it's often important that if you just take for a moment that you own real estate, let's say you have a house in France and you live in Texas, then it is important to consider what the French law would be, the law of each country in which you own stuff, or if you have bank accounts in different countries or real estate in different countries, you should consider those different country laws. And then sometimes we'll figure out how to mishmash them together. And sometimes you need two wills, or sometimes you have one and you say what law controls. As far as during life making medical or financial decisions as you cross borders, I don't have the answer to that one. And that would be, I think, dependent. It would take some more research onto where are you coming from and where are you going? What are you trying to do? But I would hope that the hospitals would be able to help in that regard. They often will come up with, some of you may have been asked, hey, you're about to have knee surgery. Do you have this healthcare directive? Like they'll try and push it on you because they want to have something in place.
The second... Nope. Go ahead, Nicole. Go ahead.
If you're a young adult and you're thinking, I'm barely out of college or haven't even started college, I'm scraping together my hourly wage from whatever. I know this is like a very specific question. How much approximately could this run someone to even get this started? That seems like a big thing that might be a barrier to them even getting started. I don't think I have money for this.
Yeah. So it depends. It is pretty specific to where you are and which
Right.
lawyer. So different lawyers charge different amounts. Some lawyers or law firms will charge a flat fee. And you can, I mean, it's pretty easy to ask. You can call somebody and say, hey, how do you charge? Other folks will charge by the hour. And there's a big difference for I'm going to say simple, but everybody thinks they're simple. I can tell you, everybody thinks they're simple, and people might not be as simple as they think because all they know is themselves, right? So, but the more complex with finances, the more tax complicated, the more stuff you own and where it is can make things more expensive. But generally speaking, I'd say in the United States, it's probably going to be a few $1,000s at the bottom rate to start and do something. There are some online, do-it-yourself type plans.
I was going to ask about that too. Is that
so? I
really?
caution about those.
Yeah.
I can't speak to any of them in particular, but I can say the one time I had somebody bring me a will that they did online themselves and were super proud of themselves and handed it to me and wondered why they needed to pay me to do this work, and the will was not legally effective. So the program that had spit it out, if they had died with it, it would have done nothing.
And you might just be wasting money on doing it twice. Right?
And so they might work, they might not work. They may or may not be able to do all the things you want. But I really encourage folks to talk to actual humans to do actual planning. And I'd say it's worth it, right? Like particularly if you're getting into tax situations, the money that you're saving your family can totally pay for itself. And the peace of mind can also pay for itself, right? Like it is absolutely more expensive in most cases if you or your child or your parent ends up in a coma type scenario in the hospital and you're not going to die tomorrow, but somebody's got to pay your mortgage and pay your bills. If you don't have this plan in place, then it can be a lot more expensive and a lot more time consuming.
Is there anything that is similar to, and I've never seen anything like this. I have seen the, do-it-yourself online wills or print things off wills. My sister and I just have a verbal communication that she's just going to handle everything, which has worked for me so far in my peace of mind. And I do love my sister, but I'm sure we should maybe, do things logistically. Is there any type of program or organization or foundation that will help people that maybe want to do this? Obviously, it's very important for a lot of our families that feel they need to do this, but feel like they can't do this. And no matter how much they scrimp or save. Is there anything like that exists?
So I don't know anything on a national level, but every state has a bar association and which handles licensing of law, right? And so anybody could call or email your local, if you're in the United States, your state bar association and ask for, there's what we call it pro bono work, pro bono or low cost services. And sometimes there can be resources, but they're often, like any of those types of services, are pretty community specific, and it might not cover the whole state of Texas, for instance. It might be this one little community has this organization that helps. But I'd encourage you the Bar Association might be a good resource for that.
That is probably a good thought too. We have something local here called our Local 211, which is kind of like this go-to source for any community sort of help. And I've never even thought to look on there to see if that's something that is a community resource to utilize. So. And
I would say some employers too offer an estate planning benefit, so it's worth asking. I get asked from time to time about this from clients where their employer will say, hey, we'll pay X dollars for you to do an estate plan, but you've got to use this list of 10 lawyers, right? Or whatever. So it might be if you are employed and have a larger employer or a smaller employer, ask them if that's a benefit that they help cover.
So parents may want to start saving for something like this as their child starts reaching 18, because an 18-year-old may not have thousands of dollars
and it
ready to go, right?
And I'm just giving general,
right?
Right. Powers of attorney can be like powers of attorney might be a lot less. It depends. Right. It depends on where you are and what you're trying to do. But I encourage you, I would definitely say that don't let money be a factor in stopping from asking the question. Well, pick up a phone, call a local law office and ask them, and see what they say. And often I know folks sometimes will call me, and even if I or my firm are not the right fit, I can pretty quickly zero in on what they might need and send them to somebody who's more appropriate for them. So you might get, filtered down the chain a little bit till you find a good fit for you.
That's great to know.
That's really good to know.
If you have, you had pointed out, don't let perfection get in your way of starting this process. So for the parents of SDSF children, picking someone to take your kids, or just finding someone sometimes that will say yes, sometimes could be one of our barriers. What do you suggest for that? Just pick somebody and we can change it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Pick somebody and you can change it. So
Okay.
what I often find is folks are worried about, well, maybe my parents, but they're kind of old. I don't know if they'll be able to do it. Or I want my sibling and my spouse wants their sibling. Oh, but my spouse's sibling lives out of state. I don't want my kids to have to move, right? You can put all of these machinations in your document. You can say, my parents, so long as
they're living, right?
whatever,
Yeah.
right? And your parents, in most places, if you name somebody, they don't have to do it, right? So if you name your parents and then something happens to you and you both die and your parents are the first ones named, if your parents are not alive or they're not competent, they're not going to be forced to do this. Then it might go. So I really like to have alternatives, parents, then siblings, then best friend, then neighbor, whoever it is down the line, so that you have a laundry list of people and you can change it.
Yeah.
Plan for today. And if 10 years from now, your 3-year-old is 13, I would say a large majority of the time, people change their minds about guardians because of whatever reason. And you can change it. But if you do nothing, it will be a lot more stressful for everyone.
Is that change really expensive? Is it like creating a whole new trust, or is it like usually simple change?
It depends. I mean, I would say in most places, it depends on what the fix is. If you're just replacing Bob with Sam, right, then generally it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it's going to depend on how the law firms charge and what they do and how things work.
Okay. So
Angela had wrote in and asked, and this might be a good sort of answer. Can a fill in the blank power of attorney from the hospital work?
So sometimes, right? So you'd have to read the document, right? So it depends on what it actually says. So I encourage you to read the actual document, and when hospitals present you with those, read it. Actually read it before you sign on the dotted line to see what does it actually say and what are you actually giving over. And is it forever, or is it just for that procedure or for that day or for that night you're spending in the hospital? Figure out what you're actually signing, and keep in mind that generally speaking, your most current documents control. So you don't necessarily want to be doing a document here and a document there and a document there, thinking that you're covering 3 different scenarios, because your last one should control.
Very interesting.
For each type of
so
document.
you had said probably have some sort of spreadsheet of debts and whatnot. So but don't have like bank account information or whatnot on that. Should we be giving our power of attorney person access to those Excel spreadsheets, or should that actually be written out in the trust that refer to that? Because I was thinking, especially like off the top of my head, we spent $160,000 on IVF. We just paid that all off. So that would have been on our trust, but now that's gone. And obviously things change, right? Like money changes very often, especially.
Yep.
So can you just refer to that Excel spreadsheet? Because that seems like a really moving target. Like you're buying things and paying off things. And
so generally speaking, your will and your trust are not going to reference actual assets. Unless, for instance, you have some specific thing like, I want my house to go to person X. But usually your documents, your will or your trust will say, my estate shall go to my spouse, but if my spouse predeceased me, then to entrust for my 3 kids, right? Or however you want it to go. And then separately, whatever your bucket of stuff is going to be what passes to your surviving beneficiaries. And so separately, keep that list of your assets between you and your spouse, so you have everything, including work benefits, including work life insurance policies, including pension benefits, including anything like that. So specifically what the benefit, because often, a spouse may not know specifically all the benefits that your other spouse has if you're married, or your kids, if you're a single person, they may not know, or your sibling may not know all the things you have, and just keep it updated. Look at it every few months and go through it and say, are these still, Bank of America account 123 or whatever it is? Are these debts still applicable? These mortgages still applicable? Do I still have the same bank account, same cars, same life insurance? And when you go buy or sell something really big, write it down. Update your list.
Got it.
Your list may not be perfect,
right?
But
Because people buy cars, right? Like every few years or something, right?
And cars are a little more obvious because they're parked in your driveway or your garage, right? But your life insurance policies are less obvious. So, and I wouldn't necessarily say, for your spouse, sure, but if it's somebody else, you don't necessarily need to give them this updated financial spreadsheet all the time, but tell them, hey, I have a will, I have asset list, it's with my lawyer at firm X, and this is my accountant, and everything's organized, or I keep all the stuff in my safe and here's the code, or I keep it in my, office drawer to the left of my desk, and this is where you can find it. Tell somebody that you trust where they can go digging for your important papers.
So what I'm learning is, don't worry about perfection. Worry about what you would want tomorrow. And then even more so, letting the perfection aspect of it, don't let it roll over into how am I going to pay for this or get it done. Reach out for local resources. Look into calling law firms, seeing if they have resources or seeing what their costs are to even start with. And then tell the people who you've written down where to put the things.
That's right.
Do you find that people sometimes, I'm really focused on the who's going to get your kids, because I'm thinking of a couple of things that I've heard people say to me over the years. One of them was, they said yes, but now my kid is a lot more medically complicated, and now they're kind of backpedaling on that. So I guess that list of, if this you have this person, you can move that list around, but say you don't have that list moved around, if they say, no, this is too complicated for me, which is valid, right? Like sometimes it's just too complicated for not everyone can handle it. Then you go down the list. The second thing I'm thinking of is someone having this huge conversation with someone. They say yes, which is a big deal. And then you think, I want to change that, but I've already had this huge conversation with this person. What do you say now? Like, just kidding? Like, do you find that a lot in your practice?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So it becomes it's complicated. And so some of it is personal choice, right?
Yeah.
So here's what I'd say. Having backups is really important. A lot of people do change their mind. You generally have a good idea if you name somebody, if they're capable, if they're up for it, if they would think it's too complex. You can sometimes have the conversation in a more general manner without saying, will you be my guardian for my kids? You can say, hey, what do you think about this? I'm thinking about doing some estate planning. There's all these, just have a more general conversation about it.
So you don't have to have a huge
you do not have to ask somebody. You do not have to tell them. And it's probably not going to happen. Right. So it is the exception, not the rule, that the parents will pass away and those guardianships will kick in. And so I have had it happen. But when it happens, usually the people who are named will flip over backward to do anything they can to help in the scenario. Your friends and family, because when it's actually happened, they will step up. And if they're not able to step up, they pretty quickly step down. And let the other people handle it. So I wouldn't worry too much about hurting somebody's feelings, and you know what, if you picked somebody before and then you change your mind 10 years from now, why do you need to tell them? Why do you need to go through that conversation? I mean, I was thinking would it cause more, because a lot of this,
is like I've had my dad passed, and it was really nice what he had lined up, and it's really, really nice what my mom has lined. Like she has even because she had when her mom passed away, she was like, I realized how much I didn't want you guys to go through. So I see why it's really important. But if someone's preparing to take your kids and then the document says something different, are you causing a big issue with the people that are left with all your stuff? Does that make sense? Like, so I could like say Peter and I passed away or whatever, and then there's I thought I was getting them. I thought I was getting them. They talked to me. Does that make sense?
So I think it's
Yeah.
really all a personal issue. And
Yeah.
again, to back up and not let perfection
Yeah.
stop you in your tracks. So a
Yeah.
lot of people will get stuck on wanting it to be perfect now and forever and to keep
Yeah.
the peace with every human you know.
Right.
Make
Right.
the best decisions for you and your family and your kids and
Okay.
make it legal and then
Yeah.
revisit. And know
Revisit.
that this is the best decision right now today, and then revisit and really
Okay.
revisit. Like, general rule of thumb, every few years, look at it, just read it.
Mhm.
Are they the right people? Is this the right, has life dramatically changed? Do you have more
Yeah.
kids? Did you
You
inherit?
mentioned did they divorce? And that's a really valid point because you may think, oh, they're stable together, but then if they divorce, who would we want? Right?
If
Then
something happens in a divorce, so let's say, I didn't even think of this till Nicole just said it. If let's say you
she
have
mentioned
a
it.
living will, right? And it's applicable now that you're married. If you split and you have a divorce, and now there maybe are
Oh,
two
'cause your
living
kids.
wills for what to do with the
Yeah.
children, which one trumps? Which one?
That's a good question.
So
I hope
the
this never has to happen to anyone. Just to be clear, I just really love overthinking everything and having 12 steps planned out.
I know. This one I'm really overthinking.
it's important. So the
Yeah,
living will, you might remember, is your statement of wishes and intent if you should get in a terminal unconscious
Right.
position.
Right.
The last will and testament. So those are two different things, and to be really careful of which terms, because they do different things. But the last will and testament controls who gets what and who's in charge when you die, right? So if you and your spouse get divorced and then you die, your will controls where your stuff goes, and state law under your state law, and your state law is going to control who's going to have your minor child. So in a lot of places, the other parent, as long as they're a capable, functioning, normal human being, is probably going to end up getting custody of the kids. But that's not, it depends on the facts and circumstances and your state law. So you'd want to talk to your local attorney about it, but also to consider best case scenario, you and your ex-spouse agree on, if you both get hit by a bus, who's going to take your kid, right? But it can also be of who dies first. You die first, your spouse has custody for the next 10 years, and then your spouse dies. They're, to talk to your lawyer about whether their will would control and what's going to happen. But it's a good question.
One thing I keep, Nicole, and I keep it in, I have like a spreadsheet that I share with my sister, so she has access to it, which is just like a shareable Google Doc. And all it is the name of our doctors, what specialty they are, what hospital they're seen at, and around about how often we're seen. And I don't update it as often as I probably should because I talk to her more than anything. But if something were to happen, she has an accessible document of what would need to be done, because we can't just skip a Neupogen dose.
We did that. We did that with
falling
the
apart.
binder, but I need to make it electronic as well.
And it's been really handy
yeah.
for her to have, like, she feels like she's more in control of things, even though she doesn't have to be in control of anything right now.
Yeah.
And
'Cause
we've
it's big.
also
Yeah.
kind of created a group together, which is, if let's say, kind of like a little smaller little squad of people who would be directly responsible for things right away. And maybe that doesn't mean they're
Right.
long-term
That's a good point, because with our
people.
kids, things have to happen right away.
Yes. And so this is the go-to squad activate of people who will jump to sort things out with their knowledge that they have.
Yeah. That's
And
a
it's
good
not
point.
just
Yeah.
anyone. It's my sister, it's my mom, it's
Yeah.
Nathan's best friend, Mr. Brad, the firefighter. And simply
Mhm.
because he's an EMT paramedic and could probably handle things, on a medical level if something were to happen.
That's a good point. When COVID first started,
yeah.
I was like hysterical because I never really considered my own mortality because I wasn't really, not close. I mean, we all know that like this is an inevitable thing, but when COVID first started, it was the first time that I really freaked out. Like, what if something happens to us and we go down, and what then happens, and all that. We have a question that came in Spanish.
I was just translating it.
Did you get it translated? Okay,
I
good.
did.
Okay.
It says, and this is probably not the best translation.
I know. I'm trying to figure out.
I'm doing my best.
Okay.
I'm from the CDMX. My son is diagnosed with Shwachman-Diamond Syndrome, and I would like to be more informed. And I'm assuming the first one that came in was that they're not quite understanding this in English. So my best answer is that we're going to work our very hardest to get this uploaded to YouTube right afterwards, and you'll be able to translate it. You'll be able to say, turn on the captions, please translate this. It does take a couple hours for the translations to come through, but they do come through. And that's a good information for all of our past videos as well. If you'd like to be more informed, there's all of our past SDSF lives we've done on our YouTube channel, and they are able to be translated right away for all the information.
That's a good point. So if you've just been diagnosed and you're in a different country, or and you would like to go back to our library on YouTube, all of it is.
And I'm going to try to translate it and type that in.
Okay. We had our Warren show, Dr. Warren show. We had questions coming in from all over the world that we were trying to translate really quickly. And we realized we needed a translator for some of these shows. Do we have any other questions? Sarah, I can't thank you enough. Like, you explain this in such a easier fashion, and it really is emotionally charged. It's emotionally charged on so many levels. Like, we're taxed already with like all the medical information, right? Like, most of us when we started didn't know what a neutrophil is or what pancreatic insufficiency is or whatever. This is a lot to take in, but
it's really important. And
it's so important.
It's something that, just like all the medical stuff, I mean, everybody on here is really good at managing or figuring out how to manage the medical stuff. You can figure out how to manage these documents, and it's so important to have them done while you're capable and you're competent, and before anything does happen, you'll be really grateful that you have it, and your family will be really grateful. So it is something that during COVID, a lot of people, it did wake people up to say, oh my gosh, I am mortal too, and I have to deal with this. We saw a big influx of people, when we're being reminded on the daily basis.
It really freaks me out. Like, oh my God, we can go together. We could go together, right? And then what happens, right?
And even though it's really super hard to do, and it is emotional, and it is something that people want to avoid, once you've at least gotten the basics, fundamentals down, people really feel better. It's like cleaning your bathroom. Once it's done, you really are glad that it's done. And you will have to do it again, but for the moment, it feels really good.
And I do love a good clean bathroom.
Right?
And most of us are planners, whether you're a patient or a parent of a patient. We have to keep everything so organized. So this really is in our wheelhouse. It just may not be a lot of you explained a lot of the terminology really well. Thank you, Jackie. I was gonna text you and ask you if you could translate that real quick, because I know you speak so many languages. She's so good about stuff like that. Thank you so much,
I forgot that Greg, our behind the scene tech, lived in Venezuela for a hot minute.
We could have jumped in, Greg.
He jumped on and started translating. This is great.
This is great. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
I don't know why we're here. I
know. Okay, so as always, if you watch this later, not live, and you have questions, please just send them to Michelle and I, and we'll try to get them answered. Sarah, thank you so much for your time. Like, this really was such an important show. It's been on our list to have since we started the show 2.5 years ago. So we're so thankful.
Well, it's been a pleasure and lovely to see you ladies, and hope everybody else out there is well, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Thank you, Sarah. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
And everyone, make sure to check out our upcoming shows. We're going to have Neuropsych come on, IEP 5014, school accommodations. We're going to have another SDS 101, Hematology 101, and then we're going to have a multitude of GI issue shows. There's just like our schedule. Nicole and I mapped out our schedule.
Through
and
December.
It's
actually
like
through January. We're booked through January.
I think we finally got organized with our lives, and we're doing great.
Finally.
And everything's great. But there's so much good coming up. So make sure that
so much good.
Stay tuned for them and let us know your questions.
Yeah. And if you have an idea for a show or have any comments or observations that could help us make the show better, please let us know. Thank you, Greg, for being behind the scenes. You make the shows run so much smoother.
You've also just now got a side gig as translating. So
okay, thank you all. Have a great night.
Have a good night, guys.
Bye-bye.